Okay. Well, thank you very much. And as I said, that's Benji. You need anything, text.
Oh, hold on. I have to continue.
Uh, what up, Benj?
I had to mute you for a second because everyone was muted. So you are
Ah,
good now.
I'm good now. Well, welcome everybody to the virtual tasting. I can't tell you how excited I am to be doing this and have all of you guys kind of here, quote unquote. I think that it's such a crazy time, and to gather and break bread is always very special with people. And I think that right now we all need connection as much as we can. So I'm really hoping tonight we can kind of come together. We can all kind of share this cheese and this experience. And yeah, I just thank you from the bottom of my heart for kind of jumping in and experimenting in this way with us and going through this tonight. Will and I and all the Mongers have been just so overwhelmed these last couple of weeks with the amount of love and support we've had from our regulars and from new people. And, from the bottom of our heart, thank you. This is why we're in the food business, is so we can connect with people and tell stories about all these amazing producers who work so hard to feed you all the time. But I think that in this crazy time, it's really a special opportunity to focus on all those people who do so much for us in our normal lives. So yeah, I wanted to just kind of introduce myself, the business, run down what we're going to talk about, and then we'll just get into the meat of the matter. So, for those who don't know, my name is Zach Berg. I have the privilege of being one of the co-owners of this wonderful business, and I'm one of the founders. So, me and Will Warner, um, we started this business in 2017. It started even before it was Mongers Provisions, it was Berg's Provisions, and we were just a pop-up business. Along with Benji Klein, Will, me and him have been just growing and adding more people, adding more permanent counters. So we went from Gale's Chocolates pop-up counter to Farm Field Table in Ferndale, and now to Midtown, where I'm at right now, in our flagship store. And then, of course, we're also still in Ferndale at the Rust Belt Market. Um, I've been a cheesemonger for about 12 years now. I'm a certified cheese professional, according to the American Cheese Society. And I also had the privilege of living in Napa and going to culinary school at the CIA. So my only extracurricular in my entire student life was president of the student wine club in culinary school. So that lends me my wine authority for the night. And I'm just super excited to kind of go through these products. So a little recap of what we're going to do, not recap, but rundown. We're going to kind of eat through all four cheeses. If you opened all three wines, we'll taste through all of those. And I'm going to give some suggestions on pairings, things to try. I'm going to give you some tips on how to actually cut these cheeses so they stay good in your fridge and all that kind of stuff. And I'm also going to give you the scale and tools in which I evaluate pairings with. I'm hoping by the end of the night, you both know all these products, these four cheeses, these three chocolates, these three wines, and a little bit about our chocolate. But I'm more than anything hoping that when you do your next dinner party or are thinking about what wine to pull out with what meal, you have a little bit more artillery, a little bit more thought behind that. And so you can kind of make better decisions. So let's go ahead and jump in. I wanted to introduce the wines first in case somebody's not opening all three bottles. I was telling everybody as we were gathering, don't feel pressure to open all three, especially if you're by yourself. They'll all be fine under cork for a couple days once they're open. But, I hope to describe them enough that if you just open one, you'll still get the full experience. So introducing the first one, Salvard Unique. I love this wine. Somebody said in the early comments that they really like the Sauvignon Blanc. I think it's a super fun wine. The white wine is coming out of the Loire Valley, a place that is Touraine or Cheverny are two name designations that this family sometimes makes wines under those designations, but this is a vin de Paz, a wine that does not have a designation. Often winemakers will choose to take some of their grapes that don't make the cut or for whatever reason and not get them certified. In this way, they can be more playful, right? All these certifications come with a tremendous amount of rules between, how you're barreling, what day you're harvesting, are you doing whole stem fermentation, are you picking, so on and so forth. So the family that makes Salvar, they've been making for 5 generations in this plot of land, and this is their non-designated Sauvignon Blanc. And like I said, it's from the Cheverny or Touraine region, but they're not calling it that. Then we have the Palat. The Palat is Kenanau. I'm curious, and I'm going to try to do a good job of reading comments, but how many of you guys had heard of Kenanau? Please type in if you had. I'd be really curious to see if we see, 3 people or 0 people here. I saw a never, no. That's awesome. I hadn't either. Part of the fun of this is that the Mongers is the apostrophe is at the end. It's not just my choices, it's all of our choices. So this is a Will pick. Will knew Kenanau from his college life. He had these really cool professors that he got to do some work for, and they taught him a tremendous amount about wine. Shout out to David and Maggie. And they introduced Will to Kenanau, and he introduced the group of Mongers here to it. It's Grenache from the island of Sardinia. So an island off the coast of Italy, probably a little lesser known than Sicily, but still with really strong food traditions. And they are calling the grape that we know as Grenache, Kenanau. Grenache, I think, is a really fun grape. It's going to be a lot more kind of blue or darker fruit than a Merlot or a Cab Sauv. So you'll also get a little bit more like dustiness and earth from it. I think of it as a grape that goes well with lamb and some deeper kind of fun flavors. This Kenanau is killer. And then the last one is the Patricia Green. We wanted this to be beyond just a fun virtual tasting. When we were trying to frame it, we quickly landed into staff favorites. And no wine has ever had the impact on our staff as Patricia Green. We've done 2 or 3 staff tastings where we've opened up, 10, 15 bottles at a time and tried to kind of speed round our way through them. And it's always the Patricia Green that kind of gets everybody's eyes to light up and be like, whoa, you guys are, this is really special wine, different than what we've kind of had before. So the Patricia Green is a Pinot Noir from the Willamette Valley. Really smooth. I think that the Kenanau and the Patricia both kind of share a softness from the world of reds, but I think that the Patricia Green's even a little bit more of that velvet, almost chocolate notes sometimes in that. The tannins are super relaxed in that wine. It's almost dessert wineable, in my opinion. So those are the 3 wines. Make sure you open whatever you want or all 3, and we're going to kind of go through this. So let's go first into our soft cheese, our Idle Farms. And Idle Farms is an amazing Michigan creamery. We've had the pleasure of working with them since I moved back to town. I was in California as well as Will. We were there for about 6 and 9 years or so, both in the Bay Area. And when we moved home, we were trying to kind of identify local creameries, local producers, kind of get a lay of the land. And I reached out to Idle Farms, and they shot me a sample pack. And it was really fun. It was our first sample pack when we were trying to start the business. And, they send you all their soft cheeses, all their firm cheeses. You're going to get to taste through the whole line. And what's kind of blown my mind, especially as we've eaten their cheese for the last 3 years, is, they have a really consistent thumbprint through all the cheeses. You can taste that it's all one milk. And what I mean by that is, if you ate some more commercial cheeses, you're not going to taste kind of the influence of the cheesemaker throughout all of them. You're going to theoretically taste kind of nothing in terms of a human element. It's going to be much more, always the same. And I think that it's really nice when you go to a winery or you go to a small producer and you can tell that one person made all of these. And ideally, it still branches far enough that cheese A doesn't taste like cheese B, but you know that they're all coming from one place. And I think that can be special. Idle Farms is a farmstead creamery. So that means they're raising all of their own animals, and then they're making cheese from it. Generally speaking, in the world of farmstead, I think in this world, it's rare you find a cheese that isn't delicious in farmstead, because if you've made so much effort, you work so hard to raise the animal, you work so hard to get the milk, you tend to try really hard not to trip at the finish line making the cheese. You don't see a lot of farmstead commodity products. Farmstead tends to come with a level of love and care. It's also important to note that for many years, you would never have heard the term farmstead because everything was made by that. It's really only now as a reaction to industrialization that that term even exists in our kind of lexicon of dairy. Yeah, so the Idle Farms farmstead cheese, they're also hand ladled. Go ahead and taste it if you haven't already. Taste it before you taste the wine. Get to know the product on its own before we start talking about pairings. So as I mentioned with the Salvard, with the wine, you know, it's coming from this area of France that is really well known for its goat cheese. The Loire Valley makes all these different goat cheese in all these different shapes and molds, and it kind of creates a, you know, a plethora of different flavors and textures. You know, if you take the same milk and put it in 3 different molds that have 3 different shapes, they ultimately result in 3 different cheeses. It's pretty remarkable. And I think that it's an important idea when you're just starting to get into pairings and kind of sorting your way through this to remember one of the oldest sayings in this is if it grows together, it goes together. So if you're thinking about Sauvignon Blanc and goat cheese, both from the Loire, you're kind of like halfway there. It's probably going to be all right. They wouldn't make that wine and make that cheese in the same region if they weren't intending on eating them together. Is kind of the logic behind that. I think this is a great combination. There's a handful of us who didn't get the plain one and got the garlic fennel, even better in my opinion in this case. But you know, when you eat their cheese, you see it's hand ladled. Hopefully you should notice that on your palate. When you take a bite, it doesn't smear on the top of the roof of your mouth like a cream cheese because they're hand ladling each cup of goat cheese. And what that results in is a much more delicate curd and protein structure. So if you were to take one of these pucks and just break it in half, it would have an irregular break. It would be kind of where the curds fuse together, create that shape. And so when you're chewing it, like I said, it should kind of flutter away a little cleaner because of that. And with the Sauvignon Blanc, I think you get kind of the herbaceousness of goat cheese. I'm gonna taste along with you so I get a little reminder. But you get this herbaceousness, this creaminess, and then when you chase it with that Sauvignon Blanc, what I think is really fun is the acid of the Sauvignon Blanc goes ahead and it actually cleans out your mouth. You get all this fat that kind of collects on your mouth from the cheese, and the Sauvignon Blanc will go ahead and wash that away. And I think it also can bring out some of the other kind of secondary flavors and notes in the cheese, as well as the wine. So back to the wine a little bit. For me, the notes in this wine, the smell is really distinct. I get a lot of like apricot and melon. It reminds me of those like those candies you would get at the Asian supermarkets, the like gummies, the melon flavored gummies, that really high note of fruit and like blossom. That's a lot what I'm getting on the nose. But when I actually drink it, it tames down a lot. It definitely has the acid that I keep talking about. But the flavors end up being a little less high note and crazy. I get a lot more like lemon curd, which is a flavor that I would already think of in goat cheese. So you get this kind of bright, tangy lemon in both the wine and the cheese. I think they're really fun together. What are people thinking? I would love to hear some comments or see some comments. People enjoying that pairing together? As you kind of gather your thoughts about that, we're going to start to transition to Flory's Truckle. As I was thinking about the order of this, I kind of, I don't want to say I broke rules, but I took liberties. I didn't structure it the same way because I really wanted to make some points about going back and forth between white and red. And I thought putting the cheese in this order helped me do that. And so I should have said this in the very beginning. All of what I'm going to show you are my suggestions. So the things I thought went best, I'll highlight, but break every rule I put in front of you. I really think it's more fun to take all of these and try them in every combination and see what works for you. I think that everybody kind of has a different palate and people are going to find different things that speak to them. So we're going to move on to that Flory's Truckle because I think it will help kind of discuss this transition. Flory's is a really cool, also a staff favorite. We discovered Flory's not this past Christmas, but the one before. we started getting this cheese in a little bit before. It became a hot seller. People loved this cheese. And then it started to kind of get weird on us, to be perfectly honest, to tell you the whole story. We started getting wheels of Florries that were a little burny, it tickled the tongue in not the right way. And it was super sad. And it's a cheese that, because of the nature of how it's made and because of how old it is, when you start finding a problem, you're kind of sure that problem is going to be there for a while. And I'll tell you why. So you all have your little menu that has some facts about this cheese, but in case you didn't do your research before, I'll just let you know, the Flory family is a really wonderful Amish family, and they're making the cheese. And after around 2 months, they give that cheese to the Milton Creamery, and the Milton family or the Milton Creamery takes it to market and does all the commercial pieces of it. And so it's a really cool symbiotic relationship. The Florys get to, have their beautiful herd of cows and preserve their way of life. And we all get this wonderful cheese, and they don't have to, go to trade shows and do things that just really doesn't suit them. And the reason why that kind of affects the flow of the cheese is if I have a problem as the Flory family and I'm doing something wrong, and I'm waiting till Milton's customers tell me, and then it's a 10-month-old cheese, whatever change I make in the make room is going to take a long time to play out to the cheeses on the counter. And so we actually gave the Flory truckle, I don't know, maybe 12-month break. We might have given it a whole year. Maybe it was 8 months. And after somebody was able to explain what was happening, I knew they understood it well enough that it wouldn't be a problem anymore. And so we got it back just before Christmas this year, and it's been so fun to have old school perfect Florys. So a little bit about how to cut this cheese before we kind of delve into what it tastes like. Thank you, Benji, for putting it on this. So you'll see some of your cheeses are going to have kind of 2 rinds, 3 rinds, 1 rind. I think it's important that you kind of approach your cheese with some thought so it can preserve. If you had a rind on both sides, I'd trim 1 rind off, I'd keep the back rind on, and I'd cut pieces as I went. This cheese is a cloth-bound rind, so some people who really like intense flavors might enjoy that rind. It's a little dry. I don't actually eat these rinds very often, and so I would trim it off. If you're a more adventurous eater, you can take the piece and eat towards the rind, and if you like everything, go ahead and eat the rind. It's part of the experience for a harder cheese. For the soft cheese, obviously, there is no rind. The Gruyere, kind of the same story. It's a natural rind. There are those who eat it. I'm not one of those. And same with the Toscano. The Toscano, they treat with a little paraffin wax. So I would skip that rind. So whenever I evaluate a cheese, I both eat it and I also break it apart and kind of play with it. This is not the sexier part of the job. I tend to mash my cheese like Play-Doh especially when I'm judging competitions or doing it professionally, judging a cheese for the first time. And the reason is because while I can get a lot of information from my mouth, the flavors, the textures, the true fat content versus protein is something that my fingers can do a better job than my mouth can. Everything's going to taste silky and delicious texturally, but I can get a real strong sense of how crumbly the cheese is and how much fat's in there if I beat it up like that. And so, little side note there. The Flory family has a very small herd of cows. You're tasting really what these 20 cows eat every day. It changes depending on where in the field they are. It's a cheese that always tastes this really grassy, beautiful, sharp cheddar flavors with slight fluctuations as the cows move around. And so I thought that this cheese gave us a really cool opportunity to talk about how you approach pairings. There's generally kind of 2 different camps when you're talking about pairings. You're either doing a complementary pairing where you're accentuating a flavor like with like, or you're doing contrasting, right? So in the case, if you took your Sauvignon Blanc, which was already kind of grassy, and you tasted it with the Flory's truckle, which I invite you to do right now, that's a complementary. You're taking the grassiness of this cheese and the grassiness of this wine, and you're bringing that out. So go ahead and do that and let me know what you think.
And Zach, a quick question for you from Nina Kelly. What's the typical production if 50 wheels is not a lot?
So a typical production is really hard because it's similar to wine. And thank you, Benji, for highlighting that question. You know, the difference between a little guy and a medium guy or a big guy is just such miles in between. So if you talk about a company like Tillamook Cheese, Tillamook is making in the thousands of pounds of cheese a day, every day, thousands of pounds. If you get beyond a Tillamook, beyond like a grocery store into like true commodity, they make blocks of cheese that start at 680 pounds. So they make a full pallet cube of cheese at a time. And they're making, you know, hundreds of those. So you really get into the millions of pounds per year, hundreds of thousands of pounds per month when you're talking about big production. When you're talking small production, you know, you can't survive if you're making one cheese a day. It's a little too small. But, you know, I guess to give you some perspective on it, they're doing around 50 wheels a day. Their wheels are about 20 pounds. So that is 2,000 pounds of product, which means that it's multiply that by another 10. And that's how many pounds of milk they're getting in. And so that's like 20. I guess the way to keep it in perspective is that it's a 20 cow herd. And the average herd in America is in the hundreds. You know, small family farms are going to be in that like 20 to 60 heads. But if you're a mid-sized family farm and you're really doing fluid milk or cheese in production, you're going to have hundreds of cows. And if you're talking about like feedlots or really big production, you're talking about thousands of cows. So 20 is a tiny by any standard, and especially an American standard. That's kind of the number you would see if you were talking about a Swiss Alp herder. Yeah. Does that answer the question? I'm going to take that as a yes. All right. So the Flores truckle, you got the grass with grass when you taste it with the white. If you taste it with the Cananao, you start to, instead of doing this complementary, we start thinking about a little bit more of the contrast. And you also start kind of thinking about this idea of matching weight, right? If I have something that's the most beautiful, delicate white wine, it's not going to match up with a big, bold anything because it's big and bold, right? It doesn't matter if it's like with like or complementary or contrasting, there's a weight issue almost. And so if I move to the red, I get some of the dustiness, I get some of the cave in this red, and I get the same in the cheese, but I'm not actually doing that like highlighting just one note. I think I'm much more kind of giving the cheese a little bit more open thing to contrast. So I think it goes really well with the red wine. It's a different pairing for sure, but I think it's really fun. I think, you know, the Cananao, one of the nice things about that kind of a wine is it doesn't need a stake. It's the kind of red you can kind of drink on its own, but it does hold up to bigger, bolder flavors. So if I was cooking a bold red sauce, the Cananao is going to be fine. If I'm eating a steak, it's going to hold up. If I'm eating a bolder cheddar like this, it's still going to hold its own. Yeah. Which red would this go with? So I think that this cheese is going to go with either red. And I really think that you should, kind of like I mentioned earlier, break all the rules and try them with everyone. But I personally really like the Cananao with the Flores. That was my favorite. And I mentioned earlier that I set up the cheeses to kind of be these transition points to let you drink all the wines and see how they all interact. If I was to have organized this pairing in a different setting, I probably would have put this as number 2, the Toscano, done the Flores and ended with this Gruyere. But I really want to see how your palate reacts to both going back and forth. So want to make sure I mentioned everything I wanted to about that one. Yeah, so we're moving to Alpage Gruyere. Alpage Gruyere, you know, I wanted this to be a staff favorite, but I would say that the Alpage and the Toscano might fall more into Zach's favorites than staff favorites, is how they got their billing here. It's part of the benefits of being in charge is I can make choices like that. But the Alpage Gruyere has been killer. I've been so happy with it. We've never carried Gruyere for the 3 years or 2 years we've been around. We've carried a cheese called Comté. Comté is a French mountain cheese. I imagine a lot of you guys, if you've been to our shop, have had the Comté. But we had, I guess we'll take a pause to talk about these great relationships we built with our vendors. Not all my vendors, if they call me and say, Zach, you got to get this, am I going to listen? But a couple of our vendors we've known for long enough, they've sent us samples, we've talked, they know our palate. And Elder over at Zurcher Cheese in Chicago, he was like, I got some Alpage Gruyères, you should get one. And, it was a really fun cheese. It's one of those cheeses I think is so bold that if you've not had it before, it's almost like, wow, cheese can taste like this. It's really big. And so Alpage refers to this idea that this isn't just Gruyere, but it's Gruyere from the top of the mountain. So Gruyere is a mountain cheese, a little bit about like categorizing cheese. If you look at our cheddar, right, it has all these holes in it. It's, fairly flaky and things like this. The Toscano, you're going to see a little bit more texture in between, all the little pieces. But when you get to the Gruyere, it looks very uniform, right? It's actually pliable because there's no kind of fissures, there's no space. They pack that cheese. They literally heat it up and they press. And that's a benchmark of how you make a mountain cheese. And that's why mountain cheeses make fondue and all these great melted dishes, is because I've engineered the cheese to melt so perfectly. And so Gruyere is one of the quintessential mountain cheeses in the Swiss Alps. The Comté I referred to earlier is in the French Alps. And both of these cheeses pre-exist or predate the borders that divide them, right? It's literally just like this village makes this cheese, that village makes that cheese. And now here we are a millennia later, they still make those same cheeses. They're village cooperative cheeses. And so the whole village, kind of like how Detroit is the Motor City, and everybody either works in auto, or you work in auto sourcing, or you work in HR for an auto company. So many people touch the auto industry in some way. Some of these kind of famous cooperative systems are very similar, where you might raise the cows, you might age the cheese, you might make the cheese, you might sell the cheese. There's a lot of jobs. Yes, the email was sent out with this, specifically with the Gruyere. We did you should have a little write-up on it. And if you actually deep dive on this Gruyere a little bit, there's some great articles. Culture Magazine, one of our favorite magazines, The Word on Cheese, they have a great article just about this specific Gruyere and the family who makes it. And so when you make these Alpage cheeses, you're literally following the snow melt as it melts in the spring into summer, and you're bringing your herds up and higher up the mountains. It's a process called transhumance, and it's been going on for thousands of years. And when you get to the top in the summer, the wheels you start making in that above 1,800 meters above sea level, they get a special designation of Alpage. Further beyond just the height, the circle in which I can gather milk gets much tighter when it's an Alpage. So I can only have product from cows that have grazed within 4 kilometers. So back to what we were talking about with the Flory family, you can't have 1,000 cows in a 4-kilometer setting without kind of being on top of each other. It almost, based on that smaller circle, dictates the size of the herd. You don't really find anything above 60 cows in a Swiss Alps. And so it's a small circle, and it really gives you a sense of, I think of it as a time capsule. I mean, if you want to know what the grass on top of the Swiss Alps tasted like in 2019, eat this cheese. It's really crazy, and I think that those like wild mountain grasses give you flavors in cheese that you don't expect. So I get a lot of high acid on this cheese. One of our employees said it tasted and smelled like artificial strawberry. But either way, it's bold. There's a lot going on. And that artificial strawberry, that high acid, those berry notes kind of give you a really cool opportunity to taste both the reds. And there's definitely some similarities in the 2 red wines, but I think that having the cheese as somewhat of a control allows you to experience those differences. So go ahead and cut yourself a piece of the Gruyere. And as I was saying, be mindful of keeping the cheese as whole as you can as it's cutting. So I'm leaving this back rind on, and I'm just kind of cutting towards it, right? So I'm going to cut 2 chunks off for myself. I'm going to trim off the rind because I don't like that. And then go ahead and, if you haven't already eaten the cheese, make sure you take a bite. Get, that product all on its own. If you want to be me and, go ahead and play with it and see what I mean. I mean, you definitely get a different set of information from mushing the Florey's truffle versus this cheese. It tells you a lot about how they're cooking and pressing that cheese. It's half eaten already. I like that comment.
And Zach,
Yeah, Benji, go for it.
yeah, Marcelo has a question. What is the name of the other cheese you mentioned along with the Alpage Gruyere? I assume the Comte and talk.
Comte, yeah. So Comte is spelled C-O-M-T-E, and it's a mountain cheese that's made just like 100 kilometers to the west, and it's very similar. And it's the mountain cheese we, for most of our time, have kept going with until this Alpage kind of came into our orbit. Any other questions, Benji?
Nothing right now, but talk about the wine pairing and then what you're tasting with the two of those.
Yeah, so the Cananal, go ahead and take a sip of this. And then when I do a pairing, I chew, I take the wine, and to be a little graphic, I make a little slurry in my mouth. When we just eat and drink normally, there's a lack of interaction. And I think that if you're going to go as bold as to say, try this together, you really need to try it together. And so whenever I kind of make these assumptions and do these pairing examples, I do a slight slurry method. Sorry about the phone, guys. And so if you try that, I think that what my first reaction is, the wine brings out some of the saltiness of the cheese, but it also really kind of highlights that berry thing I was talking about. I get that high acid and that salt in the cheese. I also, you remember when I talked about the Cananal, I mentioned that it was, let's see if I can get this up. I mentioned that it was darker berry fruits. And I think that when you taste it next to the cheese, you start to taste how, if you're thinking about fruit, I'm not thinking about a Bing cherry in this case. I'm thinking about a blueberry or blackberry, darker fruit. I don't know how many of you guys have seen a flavor wheel, but when, mongers or wine people, sommeliers are throwing out all these names, what we're doing is you're kind of starting at a really broad idea. Does this taste like earth? Does this taste like fruit? Does this taste like the sea? Whatever it is, and then you're drilling to more specific terms. So, I keep saying that in this cheese, I get a lot of fruit. Wine is kind of obviously you get fruit, but what color fruit? Is it dark? Is it dried fruit? And I think that the Gruyere kind of highlights the darker fruit of the Cananal. And then when you drink it with the Patricia Green, so for me, what this highlights is how smooth the Patricia Green is. It's almost more textural to me. It's less of a discussion of the fruit, but it's more of a discussion of this like barrel and tannins. The Patricia Green, I don't know if any of you guys have ever poured a glass of wine and it feels like it's super tight and there's something wrong with it, and then you go back to it later and it's relaxed and it's super luscious. The same idea when you're opening a wine or people tell you to let it breathe. This one feels like it's pre-breathed for you. It's bottle conditioned. It sat in the barrel and it did all that hard work. And I almost get a sense of how much softer those tannins are when I eat those next to each other or drink those next to them. I think that I get more of the berry interaction and kind of the fun of things from the Cananal, but I still, it helps me appreciate what's interesting about that Patricia Green. Patricia Green, I didn't talk enough about them. They're a really cool winery. Patricia Green is unfortunately no longer with us as a person. Patricia passed away in 2017, but her team and her business partner, head winemaker Jim Anderson, have continued to make wine. they, in the Willamette Valley, which is known for Pinot Noir, I believe that they make the single highest number of bottlings of any vineyard. So that means that they're doing the most one-offs, the most like Pinot from this corner of that vineyard, this Pinot from this corner of that vineyard, picked on, you know, Tuesdays. And they have all these variations. They're really having a lot of fun. And when we first got introduced to this wine, kind of back to this idea of our vendors getting to know us, Dion from Veritas came in and he was like, you know, he did a little bit of a salesmanship game. He's like, this is out of your price range. You guys, you would like this, but it's not for you right now. And we're like, well, pour it then. And we both tasted and we're like, yep, we're going to take that. And we thought we were splurging. We were like, oh my God, we just bought a wine that's going to retail for $30 a bottle. And Will reminded me when I was doing my research that it is the cheapest Patricia Green product by a good margin. If you really love this region, if you really love Pinot and you wanted to like do a course on that region and, you know, kind of work your way up the ladder, this is a great producer where you can start at this $30 Pinot and start getting a smaller and smaller circle until you're drinking, you know, $300 Pinot Noir from them and really getting a sense of it. So thank you. Can I explain what tannins are? Thank you for that question. Tannins are actually a chemical compound that's found in the skins and the stems of wine. And so it's the same chemical compound that's in your tea. It is the same chemical compound that's on the peel of your apple. And the word tannin, you might think of a tan hide, right? It's actually the same chemical that people would use to tan leather. And it's astringent. It makes you pucker a little bit. It kind of dries out your tongue. It gives you that grip on your tongue when you're drinking wine too much and you're like, wow, I feel like someone could shave my tongue right now. That's the tannins reacting to it. And so tannins, if they're really harsh, back to that grip idea, back to, oh my God, I need a steak. I need all that fat to kind of loosen my saliva again from the tannins, versus a wine like this Patricia Green where it clearly has it. It has that structure. It was built that way, but it's really soft at this point. And that happens over time. That happens from the wood. It happens from a really masterful winemaker that kind of, you know, makes it relax that way.
Hey, Zach, a couple of questions we got in that you might not have seen. The Fredleys asked about a Turkish apricot. You had mentioned that earlier. Do we have any in the store? And then they also asked, realized we missed this earlier, what Mongers came from, where that word came from.
Oh, thank you. So we definitely have the Turkish apricots in the store. I buy them by a very large case. They're very tasty. And with the unique Salvar, that is perfect for me. I think that the nose on that is an apricot. So that'd be a really fun pairing. And then the term mongers is an old term. Mongers is, you hear the word fishmonger, warmonger, cheesemonger. The Cheesemongers Union goes back to the 1400s. In the late 1400s, there was a dairy region in the UK, East Anglica, that was known for the best dairy. Be similar to like a Vermont or Wisconsin in today. And they realized that it was important as a trade kind of organization to set up a advocate group. You know, everybody's going to be like, try my cheese. It's the best cheese. And they're like, no, we have the best cheese. The best cheese comes from this region. We need people to know that. And so they created this kind of group, the Cheesemongers Union, to put their stamp of approval on East Anglica cheeses or any cheeses that were beyond, you know, it was like a third party, you know, to say this cheese really is that good. And I think it's fascinating because we're doing the same work now, right? I get to tell you, I get to eat all the bad cheese, so I only show you the good stuff. And trust me, there is some bad cheese that comes. I could seriously eat this Gruyere all along. Me too. The Gruyere is really exciting to me. Side note, I melted it in the microwave recently, and my wife banned me from microwaving that cheese. So it is a little pungent when you heat it, but it's good in you know, mac and cheese. Something about microwaving it just ruined the house for it. All right. So I think I answered the tannin questions. We talked about those two cheeses and the kind of transition to the Patricia Green. And now we're going to go to the Pecorino Toscano. You know, I mentioned earlier I've been selling cheese for 12 years. It blows my mind when I think about it. I got a job at Zingerman's. Zingerman's is this amazing place in Ann Arbor. For those who don't know, it is a beyond just a deli, it's really a beacon of food education. You know, Ari won James Beard Award for top 100 most influential people in American food, the same award that Martha Stewart has. And they've really become tastemakers and educators and, you know, all sorts of different things. I worked at their deli in 2008 to 2010. And so much of what I do at the store and so much of what I learned kind of started right there. And I sold this cheese there. I've sold this cheese at every counter, at Zingerman's, at Byright, at Mongers that I've ever worked. And I think it's a fantastic cheese. And yes, I do know Diego. Diego worked at the mail order, but I know him because it's a small world in cheese. He's a very knowledgeable guy, good dude. So the Pecorino Toscano comes to us from Forever Cheese. And Forever Cheese is a really cool company. It is coming out of New York. And Forever, without you knowing that name, Forever Cheese has influenced every one of your European cheese experience, especially, I would say, primarily Italian and Spanish cheese. They're a really big importer. If you know this term from wine, if I have any wine nerds with me, they're almost like a negotiant. So they're buying all sorts of cheese, and they're not so much telling you, I bought Bob's cheese. They're rebranding it as Forever Cheese. And, you know, it sounds kind of scary to Americans. We tend to not do a lot of this white boxing of our products, especially in food, outside of like Trader Joe's that's popularized this. We like to give credit to the person who made it. And in Europe, it's not as taboo, right? Back to these village cooperatives, you lose the name of your cheese as soon as you're in one of those. No one talks about like, you know, Jan's Gruyere. It's Just Gruyere. The cheesemaker is totally lost from the equation right away. And so Forever has done that in the American market. There's a whole plethora of cheeses that no matter where you are in the States, when you order Pecorino Toscano, or if you order Campo de Montalban or Garrocha or Leonora, that you're going to get in 80% of the cases, 90% of the cases, whether or not you're in New Jersey, California, Michigan, you're going to get the same cheese made from one place that Forever's never going to tell you where it is. And they've kind of built a beautiful collection of cheeses that are always super consistent. And they've done it by building, you know, very long and deep relationships with these creameries. And I think it's just fascinating that for 12 years, this cheese has been good. This cheese has been good and affordable. Sheep's milk from Italy. It's very special. I was just in Tuscany in October, and it was a very special trip to kind of see the countryside in which I've been eating their cheese for so long. And, you know, I mentioned when we were drinking the last wine that to me, there's a lot of textural things going on in that wine. And this cheese is the same way. So the Pecorino Toscano, sheep's milk inherently has a higher butterfat content than a cow's milk. It's denser, it's richer. And so if you eat this cheese, you get a sense of that. Or if you do my little playing with your food, you definitely get a sense of it. Even who's just looking at this, Benji, if you can pull up this screen for a second. If you look at these cheeses, right? I don't know if the camera picks this up, but this one has this like glistening. And it's because the fat is so abundant that even at this room temperature, it kind of rises to the top. The butter fat comes out. And so when I go ahead and do my pushing it together, it's really soft, it's really rich, but it just falls apart entirely because there's so much fat that the protein, even though it's a perfectly well-made cheese, it can't hold it together. It just like falls apart as soon as you press it. And when I eat the cheese, it right away does that same thing with the fat. It really weighs heavy on my palate. I can taste all that fat. I can feel all that fat. And it has a distinctly sheepy flavor, right? Some people, you often hear people use really frustrating, terms when they're describing things like, oh, that tastes goaty, or oh, that tastes sheepy, but there isn't any other language for it, right? Like some of these compounds on a really chemical level, they only exist within that animal. What you're tasting often in sheep's milk is lanolin. It's the same oils that are on wool. It's why you often will think of like a wool sweater or that cozy flavor when you're eating the cheese, because it's an association. It's, it's the only other time you see or or taste lanolin or smell lanolin in your life is wearing a good wool sweater or eating the cheese. So as you eat that cheese, to me, the white wine's going to go great with that, to be honest. You could go all the way back to the white wine. There's so much acid that it's going to help clean out the palate. But if you go ahead and try the Patricia Green with it, I think you'll see something really unique. It's really interesting to me. Both are almost, I don't want to say lost, because I still think I taste this delicious cheese. I taste the like cooked cream flavors, the saltiness, and I taste the wine, but they really meld very well together. That really soft tannin, that really soft sheep's milk, they come together and make their own flavor. And so as I talk about how they come up to make their own flavor, let's talk about, as I promised, how I evaluate a tasting, right? And if you guys want, since we've kind of ran through everything at this point, as I talk about how I evaluate, go ahead and go back and taste a couple of these things and see if you can assign a number to it. I'd love to hear if anybody gets a +3 or a +2. And so when I evaluate cheese, I learned this from a woman, Daphne Zeppos, who's a luminary in the American cheese world. She passed away, unfortunately, in 2013, I want to say, maybe 14. And she's still a figure that like has weight in our industry. There's the Daphne Zeppos Teaching Award scholarship that sends cheesemongers to Europe to keep learning their craft and come back to the American Cheese Society to lecture. She impacted this industry in a great way in a short time. And I had the distinct pleasure of hosting an event with her. And she laid out this idea where a 1 through 10 language doesn't have enough nuance to kind of encapsulate a pairing, right? I can tell you I like this wine 1 through 10, plenty of language there. But when I start to talk about how things come together, it doesn't. And so she proposes a -2 to +3 scale. And every time I've ever done this, I hear like gasps when I say -2 in this like Zoom world. It's just me and the sound of the fridge right now. But I know it sounds confusing, but I think that as you start to explain each number, it makes all the sense in the world. So -2, if you think of orange juice and brushing your teeth in the morning, that is a -2, right? The orange juice is no longer tropical and delicious and fresh. The toothpaste is no longer that cool breeze, delicious mintiness. Everything has been ruined. And I have had a bad start to my day, and that is orange juice and toothpaste. There's a lot of contrast. You have ruined both products. A -1 is where that happens to just one of the products. I think this happens infrequently, but I don't know if any of you guys have ever been eating something, drinking a red wine, enjoying it, and then you took a bite of something, went back to your red wine, and all of a sudden it was super metallic-y. It had a reaction to whatever you ate, and that's a real chemical reaction. You've ruined the wine in some way because of, you've had too much something else in what you ate. And that's a -1. The zeros, I think really most things we eat end up being a 0. And it's either because you don't give it the true test, the swish that I described earlier of actually eating them together, or you're not paying attention, or just frankly, they don't interact, right? If you've gone through all 3 of these wines and all 4 of these cheeses, you'll see that some of them don't interact as much as the other. Some like really change the whole thing, and some just kind of exist going through the experience together. So a 0, I think, is very common. Most things are neutral. It's not been better or worse. Either product, they just kind of happen. +1, I start making progress on one of the products, even if I lose the other. So I think of the red sauce, right? If I'm cooking a pasta sauce tonight and I'm using my Cananao, I can make my pasta sauce taste really good, but I probably have done no favors for my Cananao. It's lost. I mean, both reality is lost in my sauce and its flavor has been lost. So that's a +1, not a +2. A +2, I think the Patricia Green in the Toscano is a +2. So they started to interact. I think that any kind of extra funk or lanolin flavors that were too much animal in here get washed away in the grapiness of this wine. And then I think, not that this wine has any flaws, it's really beyond reproach. Its added fat from my cheese makes it even smoother and even nicer. That's a positive too. Both things have rounded each other out. A positive 3 happens infrequently, but when it does, it's really special. Positive 3s, the sum is better than the parts, or the sum is better than the parts. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, right? I have made something that is all new, and it is, from now on, this is how you eat these things together. And I think in food, we always want there to be hundreds of pairings. It's one of the most common questions me or any of our mongers get is, how do I eat this? But those positive 3s, the reason why they're so celebrated and so, not common, but commonly referred to, is because they're infrequent, right? Port and Stilton is really special, like blue cheese and wine, like no other combination of blue cheese and wine. If you are a flaw eater, flaw and Sauternes will like make you understand why people always bring these things up. And so I think that those positive 3s they deserve to be celebrated. Like a peanut butter. Yes, that is absolutely positive 3 all the way. So somebody else likes the Patricia Green and the Toscano. Good. I think it's a really fun pairing. I was kind of blown away by it. It's not necessarily what I would have guessed. I would have thought Grenache would have went better with sheep's milk because of that kind of dustier, spicier palate that has. These wines, Grenache, Syrah, you see a lot of those in the Rhone in France. And the Rhone is known for a lot of lamb dishes. And so I was pretty surprised that the Patricia Green actually won that one over. Yeah, I think it's a really cool one. And so those are the 4 cheeses. Does anybody have any questions specifically about the cheese before I kind of jump into talking about chocolate a little bit? Now is your chance. You will still get an opportunity, and Benji will make sure I don't miss any of them as I look away. Oh, that's awesome. I'm super happy to hear. Somebody just said they don't usually love goat cheese, but they really liked this one. I think that this is definitely a gateway goat. Their cheese is so clean. They're making it at such a high level that it doesn't get too much of that like kind of funk and goatiness that I, so uneloquently mentioned earlier. It stays really milky, and you get much more of this like the lactic sugars and just overall delicious dairy qualities than you do in most goat cheeses. I'm actually really looking forward to, we're going to use Zoom to interview Melissa, the cheesemaker, really soon. And so keep an eye out for that coming soon. When is the next wine and cheese event? We're going to do another one of these. We're going to do spring cheese coming up on the 30th, and that has a wine component. And then we're going to get another one of these on the books. They're really fun. What is animal rennet? Great question. There's a great podcast if anybody wants to go way too deep into rennet. It's like 45 minutes. It's on Behind the Rind. I recently listened to this, but rennet is a chemical that gets cheese to coagulate. So if you think of that, picture a glass of milk. How do I get my glass of milk to look like a cup of yogurt where there's a solid in the center and like the runoff on the outside? Acid, and then rennet gets it to really shrink up. And so for much of history, we used animal rennet, and it's an enzyme technically is renin. Rennet is the collection of that enzyme, and we use what is derived from a cow most often until the 80s when we started making vegetarian rennet. So most traditional cheeses are going to be animal rennet unless they're really esoteric, and then they're using like thistle or some other types of things. But most often it's an animal rennet or a vegetable-derived animal rennet. So I love this question about the flories and the hotness and the tingliness. So that's the question, or that like threshold of, is this good? Is this the right tingle? A is going to be different with everybody's personal reactions. It's a histamine reaction. It's actually not an allergic reaction and like you should be concerned, but it has something to do with the histamines in your body. And some cheeses, you never want any tingliness. Some cheeses, you want it to be, piquant is a term you'll hear instead of spicy, but you want this tingliness. Italians love this in cheese. A really sharp provolone should have a lot of that. And then like French consider this like an affront. If you have any cheese that has that, you did something wrong. And so in Florey's, it's really it's on a dance all the time. Always high acid cheese. That's what we perceive as really sharp in this cheese is acid, more so than what's conventionally considered sharp. And when it gets too tingly, it's because too much of that moisture and acid was caught in the cheese. They were over pressing it back in the day and trapping pockets of whey's that run off from making cheese. And whey is incredibly acidic, and it was creating this like overly acidified cheese with all sorts of, you know, microflora and funk essentially that would make your tongue tingle. Hopefully this cheese is like just a little of that right now and not too much. Sorry, that was a little bit of a nerdy tangent. I just got excited. Cool. It looks like Will's also talking about the spiciness of that cheese. I think it's fascinating and I really like it right now. But I understand I wouldn't eat maybe as much if it was a little more toned down, and that's part of the sharpness, I would say. Yeah, unique with soft goat cheese was great. Heck yeah. All right, as the cheese questions and love keep coming through, I'm gonna change gears and talk about chocolate. You know, Will Warner is our chief chocolate officer, and so I have to make sure that I give all the credit to what I'm gonna say to him. I've learned a lot about cheese and stuff over these years, but everything I've really learned about chocolate has been due to Will. Will has an incredible brain and background. He was a geologist for several years before he became our chief chocolate officer. And the way his brain scientifically understands things, he was able to understand chocolate so thoroughly, so quickly, it blew my mind. So we here at Mongers kind of focus on chocolate in a really specific framework, a really specific lens on chocolate. We always aim to educate, whether it's, you know, wine, a bag of chips, cheese, whatever it is. We're here to tell you a story and tell you more about the products. And when we talked about chocolate, we realized that more people knew less about chocolate than they did cheese, right? Now that doesn't mean, I'm sure many of you are shaking your head. You're like, I know plenty about chocolate. You know, you like it. You might know about some of the variants and some of the countries it comes from. But I think if you took a class field trip of a bunch of smaller children and you showed them cacao pods growing on a tree and you said, what's going to come from that? They'd have no clue. But if you showed them a bunch of cows in the field or goats and you said, what's going to come from that? You know, milk, they're going to get to cheese eventually. You know, ice cream, I think kids are going to understand the things that are made from dairy. But in this country, because we don't grow chocolate out here, we don't really know it very well. So we focus on bean to bar chocolate, craft chocolate. We focus on producers that are sourcing with a lot of intention, and kind of telling a story through chocolate. And so Thrombium cacao is the Latin name for chocolate, the food of the gods, and it grows between 20 degrees north or south of the equator. And a good example is you can grow Cuban chocolate, but you can't do it in southern Florida. Those 80 miles make a big difference. And you know, you might find a chocolate tree in places like the Belle Isle Conservatory, but it's not going to fruit and be of production quality unless it's in those really narrow band around the world, which really suits us as, you know, a shop, because so much of the cheese and charcuterie we're talking about is, you know, northern hemisphere, sometimes southern hemisphere, but it's not the tropics. And so this really opens up the world for us to talk more of geography, more of culture, more of food. So we focus on producers that are talking about where their chocolate comes from. We have a beautiful wall of chocolate. Usually I would pan over there right now, but it's a little disheveled in this current e-commerce world. But we have chocolates from all over the country, all over the world. And we really want to show you what's the difference between eating cacao from Madagascar versus Ecuador versus Vietnam. And Maru is a great company to do this. In a second, I'm going to grab the phone and show you why. But they, you know, all these companies show you what's happening to the beans in their area. They're expressing the terroir. You know, a term you hear a lot about in wine, sometimes in cheese, this idea of a taste of place, right? You know, what does cocoa taste like grown here versus there? Having chocolate where you're focused on that, I think opens up the world of chocolate in a way that we didn't really know. I remember my first tasting with Will when we got samples. We tasted through something like 19 chocolates in a sitting. And similar to how I feel about this Gruyere, you start to sit there and be like, I literally didn't know chocolate could taste like this. I didn't know that there was this many layers and nuances. And I think it's just so fun to taste your way around the world of chocolate. So I'm gonna grab this phone real quick and show you guys something. But Maru has been a company that we started with day one. We've always really liked them. And part of that is because they focus on chocolate in this really unique way. So here's this map of theirs. So can everybody hear me all right still, Benji? I know I walked away from my computer.
Yeah, I'm trying to switch the microphone for you, so just give me one moment.
Okay, everybody. That might be a little better. So you'll see this great map of southern Vietnam. It's not all of Vietnam. That's all of Vietnam. But just this very southern tip ends up being in the chocolate growing region. So Maru focuses region by region. Oh, sorry about that. So I have lamb dong here, and you might have a different region, but it's a really cool exercise. Unlike tasting through the world of chocolate, Ecuador versus Madagascar, you can do just the, sorry, I'm going back to the map, just all these different provinces. So it becomes very much like a wine tasting. What's Ben Tre versus Tien Gang? What's the left side of the Mekong Delta versus the right side of the Mekong Delta? All of a sudden, it's just like West Bank or left bank Bordeaux versus right bank. Okay, let's get you back set up. Thanks for bearing with me. I tried to go mobile. Boom. All right. So let's try some chocolate. Thank you, Benji, for switching me back. Okay. Hopefully we don't have too much echo. Sorry about that, gang. All right, let's open your chocolates. We're going to talk about what makes a chocolate a good chocolate when you're evaluating. Cool. So the first thing you might notice is this beautiful shine, right? A well-tempered chocolate should be shiny, and it should have a snap. So shiny, snap off, should snap really cleanly. Tempering is this idea of getting all the different compounds in chocolate, all the fat, the proteins, the incredible amount of flavonoids and things like this, all in suspension. And if you don't do that, your chocolate will come out looking dusty. I imagine you guys have seen this. The term we often use is bloomed. Your chocolate looks like it has a layer of dust on it. It's perfectly good to eat. It just might not snap. It doesn't have the sheen. It's not, quote unquote, perfectly made. If you put those chocolates back into a temper, they can come back into temper, something I learned at Gales. But hopefully your chocolate looks beautiful and shiny. And when you taste and evaluate chocolate, you know, unlike wine, there's not as much of a like, do it exactly like this, swirl, you know, aerate, yada, yada, yada. But I think it's still important to kind of talk about what are some good best practices in tasting chocolate. So how I evaluate a bar is, generally speaking, I really like to do one of those, first thing, snap, check that it's clean, check that it's shiny. I'll do a snap again and then smell. Right now, perfectly honest, I smell my cheesy fingers because I didn't wash my hands in between these rounds. But if you do that fresh snap, you should release more aroma than if I just put my nose up to a chocolate bar. And so I like to do that to release some of these nuances. And then I eat it. I take about 2-3 chews until it's softer. And then I start using my tongue to kind of press the chocolate into the roof of my mouth. And there's two functions that I'm doing. A, I'm heating the chocolate more, but more than that, by pushing it like that, I'm really wafting a lot of flavor into my nasal cavity and giving myself a little bit more, information. Your nose has way more receptors than your taste buds, and so the term for that is retronasal tasting notes, to kind of get something through the throat that way. But a lot of harder things to taste or get the pull out the nuance end up being in that kind of retronasal categories. So when I taste Vietnamese chocolate, I get kind of a category. I know we talked about a little bit about flavor wheels earlier, but I tend to think about 1 to 2 regions on that flavor wheel distinctly. And I don't know if people, maybe you can shout out if you have different colors than I do, if you guys got different marus. Some of the higher percentage ones, I think, get even more of the like telltale Vietnamese cacao flavor in them. I got red. I saw somebody say that. So red and green are the ones that to me taste the most this way. When Will was in Vietnam tasting with Vince, who I'll tell you a little story about him in a second, he was convinced that Vince was just not disclosing one of the ingredients. He's like, straight up, this is in there, this flavor note. For those of you who are a little bold, I want to see people throw out flavor notes. I want to hear if anybody says anything, and keep it as like general as you want. If you want to think of like buckets of flavor, does it taste earthy? Does it taste fruity? Does it taste spicy? Does it taste kippery or of the ocean? I sure hope not. Think of these broad terms. I'm going to look in a second and see if anybody throws out some of these terms that I thought about. So I mentioned Vince has a story, as all these people do. Vince is a Michigan guy. His family grew up in Ann Arbor, and he's one of the 2 partners who own Maru. They're both partners who have a Vietnamese connection. I think that, if I remember correctly, and Will, I think, who's on here, text the answer if I say it wrong, but I believe Vince is French Vietnamese, and then the other partner is maybe Japanese Vietnamese or something of this nature. And they both met when they're on a trip in Vietnam, an agro-tourism trip. And, we don't think, generally speaking, of Vietnamese and chocolate, but the Vietnamese were under French colonial rule for a really long time, and the French love chocolate, and they're like, cool, we have property in the tropics, let's get some cacao trees in there and start growing and see how it goes. And when they left, these were really just part of the commodity market, right? The Vietnamese would sell them to these larger markets that wouldn't differentiate this from any other chocolate in the world, and now it's in a Hershey bar. But Vince and his partner saw an opportunity not just to make a really cool product, but to create a culture within Vietnam that the French never bothered to care to do. And so, they make chocolate in all these different regions or from these different regions, but they also set up really cool chocolate cafes that allow people to kind of have this Parisian chocolate experience where you can get a drinking chocolate or a cappuccino and a bar or a bonbon and sit there and have a chocolate culture within the Vietnamese community. And so often with this kind of this gap between grower and producer that exists in chocolate, because beans travel better than grapes, you have a major disconnect where like most Vietnamese, even if you're a cacao grower, never had the final product. And so to have this opportunity where you have a full feedback loop is really special. And Maru did that. So Vince grew up in Ann Arbor, like I said, he's a U of M graduate, went to Pioneer High School. I believe, and he was a marketing executive for a long time, and on this trip decided to go ahead and open this chocolate company. And you can see from their packaging, like this guy, it's not his first round. He spent a lot of time making really beautiful packaging. The original color scheme was supposed to match the different hue and blush of cacao beans pods from that region. If you look in Google cacao beans, you see kind of like mangoes. They come in these variety of different kind of blushes and colors. And originally that's the color coordinated with like, oh, I got a lot of blue cacao in Tiangang, or Lam Dong, and I got a lot of purple in Dak Lak, and so on and so forth. Right now, we have chocolate from, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different Vietnamese provinces specifically. If you wanted to do a granule tasting like that, you could look at Nicaragua. I have probably 4 or 5 villages of Nicaraguan chocolate. Venezuela, we have probably 3 or so. Peru, through Quantu, we have a bunch of different ones where you're really just tasting like this village's chocolate versus that village's chocolate. I think it's really fascinating the flavors you can get out of it. So let's see, did I get any tasting notes? I didn't really.
There's quite a lot there. Then we do have a couple questions as well for you.
Cool.
So there's a lot of people have different tasting notes here. Some pretty all.
I see some fruit and berry. I definitely get that. The thing that really differentiates that I think you get in the green and the red, I get cinnamon. I get spice. That's what Will kept telling Vince, like, come on, man, you can just tell me, like, there's cinnamon in this chocolate and you're just not putting it on the label. But it's not. It's just the terroir of that region. Benji, what were the chocolate questions?
So one, when you taste things like a Lindt chocolate bar, is that interesting to you at all, or is that just one step up from Hershey's?
Good question. So I guess Lindt makes me talk. It's a little bit of a Pandora's box with that exact company. And so most often the number one request I think we get in chocolate is people come in, they're like, oh, I want a German chocolate. I want a Belgian chocolate. I want a Swiss chocolate. And I think that really highlights how little we know about it, right? Because none of those countries I just listed grow a cocoa bean ever. They're all sourcing from somewhere else. So we grew up wanting those people's chocolates, but there's this like lack of thumbprint there. I don't know where it's from, right? And so, yes, it is a step up from Hershey's. Do I enjoy it? I am a connoisseur for sure, but I'm also just a fat kid turned pro. I love a Lindt chocolate. I love most chocolates in the right time and right place. But is it satisfying me on like an intellectual and food level? Absolutely not, right? It's much more like eating a Hershey's or a Godiva. It's a sweet indulgence. It's more of a confection, like a candy, than it is this like I'm eating cacao from this place. And I think some of our bars are like that. I don't mean to say that our entire collection is like austere and needs to be like pinkies up when you're eating it all the whole time. We have bars with inclusions that have everything from candied orange peels to like caramel puffs, and those are just fun to eat. But if I'm trying to tour the world in food and have like a thinking chocolate, it's not just a function of how dark my chocolate is. So like a Lindt dark won't do it, or a Hershey's extra special dark. It's the uniqueness of that cacao. It's the thumbprint. So yeah, that's my answer to that one.
Another question. What kind of sugar is in this chocolate, the Maru that you were just tasting?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a cane sugar, just because it's coming from that region. I tore in mine like a caveman, so I can't read it. But Maru's really focused on Vietnamese production. So they're using all Vietnamese cacao, all Vietnamese cane sugar. When they use inclusions like coffee, they're coming from that specific region, coffee from Lam Dong. When they use coconut milk, because they don't actually have access to powdered milk, they use Vietnamese coconut milk. So my guess is it is Vietnamese cane sugar, just because it'd be really weird to get beet sugar in Vietnam.
How do you clean your palate when you're tasting different chocolates?
Great question. Bubbly water is my favorite thing to clean my palate with, no matter what I'm tasting. I also just really like bubbly water. And I think with chocolate, it's important to have something like a cracker in between, almost more than cheese. I really need something to like get all the sugar, get all those flavors off my tongue and start anew. I think it's also worth mentioning in all of my experience with tasting different categories of food, chocolate is the only thing you go darkest to lightest. So, right, like we tried our softest cheese that was the mildest until we got to the hardest, boldest. And if you're drinking beer, you're going to start with your lager, end with your stouts. We went white wine to red wine. Chocolate, if we had 100%, we would taste that first. And then we would end with the really high sugar, 40% milk chocolate. And the reason is because the sugar and the milk is what's going to continuously kind of screw with your palate, right? The tannins in wine and the acid in wine is what's going to give your palate fatigue. In chocolate, it's the sugar and the milk. And so if I tasted a milk chocolate, that lighter chocolate first, by the time I got to the 100, it would taste like the bitterest dirt ever. And you'd be like, why would anybody eat this? Because your palate would get so used to the sugar.
Question about any bar recommendations with unique additions. I know the store has a ton of great ones: peppers, heat, salt, fruit. What are some of your favorites?
Yeah. So I think that I guess Will is a true blue chocolate nerd. He likes dark chocolate, and why I bring that up is because he is not going to spend a lot of time getting like almond chocolates and hazelnut chocolates. If it's an inclusion, like it needs to catch his ear. And so I feel like our inclusions are all pretty fun. We have one dark chocolate with almonds and one milk chocolate with almonds, so no begrudging chocolate and almonds. But my favorites, I really like the porcini. It's a porcini milk chocolate. It's milk chocolate with porcini powders. It's mushroom the whole way through. It doesn't hide, but every time I eat it, I'm like, apparently mushrooms and chocolate are delicious together, and I should like come up with a dessert that I make up with them. That one, the rye bread, makes my Jewish heart happy every time. Rye crumb, sea salt, coming from Pump Street. The mushroom bar is from Naive, by the way. And then what is another one? Ooh, I've been really into these halva bars. So both Naive makes a sesame bar, and then one that's not online right now, but Mirzam is this company. I think some of their bars are online. Mirzam's out of Dubai, United Arab Emirates. And I love when a chocolate company, when they use inclusions to talk about their culture, right? It's not just like, oh, I put something in the chocolate because it tastes good. They're from Dubai, and so like they're putting halva pieces, toasted sesame candies with rose water in it because like that's their culture. Or they have one that's toasted fennel and dates, and it's like, it's incredible. You can find all the chocolates I keep going on about online on our website. If you don't see a specific bar, mention it in the notes for your order and we'll contact you if it's available. We're trying to add products every day. If Will's not paying full attention to this, it's probably because he's typing and adding products right now. We have hundreds of products online and we're literally adding 10 a day or so. So check those out. I hear there's questions about the bubbly water too. I'm big into San Anuel. It might be Basque. It's a Spanish volcanic region. Basque Country is really interesting because I am all about respecting the Basque independence and I believe in it. But France and Spain don't seem to care, so they'll call it theirs, even if it is Basque. And my geography is just not that great. But it is a volcanic sparkling water from Spain that we sell in the store. I saw it in New York once, and then when I found it in a catalog when we opened here, it was one of my favorite bougie moments.
And then Will raised his hand, so we're gonna actually let Will from Mongers speak. For Will, you're on.
Oh shit! They gotta go to bed.
Where am I? Oh, hold on. Switch camera.
Yeah, you're good.
So the sparkling water he's drinking is actually I just found this out the other day, but it's from the same region that we get the Garocha cheese from. So it's from the more southern region of Spain in Catalonia.
Cool.
And some of the other inclusion bars that I love, I mentioned rye crumb, the scorpion pepper from French Broad, cardamom from Roosevelt, and also milk chocolate bar that I love is the star anise and caramelized lavender from Roosevelt as well. It's fantastic. And I'm, as Zach said, I'm a dark chocolate fanatic, but that bar really does it for me. I'll throw it back to Zach now.
Not on mute. There we go. I think I'm good now.
You are.
So friends, what questions do we have about chocolate besides that, or cheese, or pairings? What thoughts have you guys had? As people formulate questions, tell me about olives. So, it's funny. I think olives, similar to how I said that our milk chocolate or inclusion chocolates are really special because the buyer has a prejudice against them. I buy our olives and I don't like olives. And so what that means is that the olives we carry, I think, are exceptional. I always get Will's opinion on them because I know I have a deficiency and don't love my olives. But I think part of being a professional taster versus I just eat food is I have to evaluate something beyond my feelings about it, right? And so I don't love olives, but I love the ones we carry. Currently, the ones that we have online are the ones that are pre-packed because it's just been easier in this new shipping reality. But especially for you all who are local delivery zone, we have a bulk selection that's kind of hidden right now. So the Gordals is what you see online. Those are a fat, big olive that's great for martinis, stuffing blue cheese, a really versatile, very green olive, very grassy and buttery. The ones we have in the case, currently I have Luke's. Luke's are my favorite olive. They are very buttery, not as grassy. It really is like smooth, and it reminds you how there's such a connection between really good olive oil and really good olives. They're a French olive. They're also really firm. So there's like a substantial chew to them. We have Taberna olive mix. The Taberna olive mix is probably the most popular. It's a pitted olive with cloves of garlic and cornichon, little baby pickles in the brine. So it's super bright and garlicky, and I would call that a gateway olive. There's plenty of people, also because there's no pit. If you're not a big olive eater, I think eating around the pit annoys you. So a lot of people who aren't super olive oriented have been enjoying those. We have a Spanish mix, which has Zamarona, Arbequina, Pical, Gordal, and I think maybe one other. That's what I put on most of the boards because it's a mix. So, if you like a darker olive, you'll find the Zamarona or Arbequina. If you like a bigger, greener olive, you'll be happy with those Gordals. We have some Kalamatas. I don't even know if they've made it to the bowl yet, but I realized that there was a hole in our olive selection, so we recently started carrying Kalamatas. Just as I'm on this olive tangent, we built this store around this idea of entertaining, and I think it's really funny in this moment now where we're all entertaining ourselves. Cheese and chocolate became these staples, but it was like very few people just eat that on its own. You need the jam, you need the cracker. Oh, but what about the olives? But what about the pickles? Oh, we need something for a splash of color. Let's get these little peppers. And it's ballooned into this kind of crazy product selection with thousands of products probably that I'm staring at the store right now. We really focus on creating this experience, whether it's making this cheese board or just a couple of cheeses for you. We want you to have all the bells and whistles and accoutrement to make it a more special experience. So, I think that it's worth pausing when you're going through the catalog and try some of the things that you're not expecting to like. I know you went there for cheese and chocolate, but like add the Turkish apricots that somebody mentioned earlier because they're really shockingly good apricots. Shout out to Potter's Crackers. They made it into the blog recently. I've never been more excited about a cracker in 12 years of selling cheese. But they're a freshly milled Midwestern cracker using mostly Midwestern grain made in a small bakery in Wisconsin where they're baked to order and they're stupendous. So we have a lot of really fun products. I hope you guys explore them. I could also go for a Mongers grilled cheese right now. We're not even just not serving them to the public. The panini presses haven't gone on. It's not like I'm eating them by myself or anything. It's hard. Go ahead, Ben.
Question about curating any cocoa or baking chocolates. What do we sell at the store with that?
Yeah, cool call. So I have Maru cacao powder. If you wanted like straight cocoa powder, we have Maru. So you have a Vietnamese. We haven't yet talked about getting one from a different region. I think if we saw this one get a little more popular, we'd consider that. Right now, when it comes to regionality, we have more drinking chocolates. And so the point of differentiation there is cacao powder versus like crushed up chocolate bar essentially. And so you could certainly make a hot cocoa from the Maru and compare that to the Belize drinking chocolate and get a really cool experience. And then compare that to probably Venezuelan cacao is what the Hungarian chocolates are made out of. But in drinking chocolate, we have two brands. There is Rosa Volgi. We'll mention that brand by their bars earlier. They're a really cool company out of Budapest. And we have 3 or 4 different flavors of their drinking chocolates. And the reason why I suppose it's Venezuelan is most of their bars that are single origin are either African or Venezuelan. So when they're not saying where it's from, it's a blend of those. So, and they make a bunch of different ones. And then in terms of the Belize one I mentioned is Dick Taylor. Dick Taylor's in Northern California, and they're making a drinking chocolate all from Belize, probably from the Maya Mountain Cooperative, which is, I've come to realize, one of my favorite grow sites for chocolate. Every time any of our producers have a Maya Mountain Belize bar, I'm like very excited about it.
Perfect. We'll answer this in the comments and chats, but for people who didn't see, Nina asked, can you give us a sample pairing meal for each of the wines from your perspective? Will mentioned white seafood. Patricia Green was seared salmon or roast chicken. What are some of your additions on that?
Thank you so much. Great question. You know, I would definitely mimic a lot of what Will would say. The white wine for me, all day seafood. I think, you know, if you wanted to not eat seafood, I think things like grilled artichokes are coming to mind, or chicken piccata, anything that's kind of bright citrusy, anything that's going to hang in that lighter high acid world is going to be great. When I'm going to my Grenache, I would do something like a, you know, lamb ragu or a, sorry, a pasta dish that has a little bit more spice to it. If I was going to stick with a cut of meat and not a pasta, I might do a, you know, a steak, but maybe not, maybe a little leaner steak or a pork chop or something like that. I think would be great with the Cananao. Patricia Green, pardon me, I agree with Will. I think that, you know, Pinots are really fun because they're versatile. It's a wine that I can eat with things that often would go with white. I can also have a Pinot in. So if I'm eating salmon, if I'm eating a perfect broiled chicken, that Pinot is going to go great. I think it will hold up to a lot of steaks. It is certainly not like this Napa Cab that I think so many people think of when they eat steak, but I don't know about you. I don't eat that many steaks like that often. So it's nice to have a Patricia Green because I think it works with more of what you're probably going to be eating. And yeah, eggplant parm. That sounds good. I would like that with the Patricia Green. I think that's a great call. Any other questions that jumped out, Benji?
No, I think right now we're in good shape that I saw.
Awesome. Well, friends, I'm going to start signing out. I had just such an amazing time connecting with all of you. It's so fun to see all the faces. And I can't tell you how much fun I've had doing this. I hope that you guys had fun too. You know, we're at Mongers. We are very appreciative of the support we're getting and the opportunity to kind of entertain you guys and distract you right now. I hope we added some, you know, delicious flavors. I hope you learned a thing or two, and that, you know, I hope you had a good time. Please let us know what other pieces of content you would like to see from us. Reach out to us on our social media, follow us. You know, we love you all, and we're just so happy to do what we get to do, and, you know, we're going to keep doing it. So thank you all. I'm going to not close the meeting right away. So if you have friends and you want to say hi, you know, wave. I'll stop talking right away, but you guys go ahead and chill out for a second. And then Benji will close the meeting whenever he thinks it's appropriate. But thank you all so much. I'm out.